Hello, welcome back. I'm taping today from New York City, and as I've mentioned some other times, this is a channel where we apply the principles of Jnana, the ancient Hindu techniques of debate, to cultivate clear thinking in the pursuit of enhanced knowledge, inspiration, and better decision making. So today we're going to look at the Gaza conflict as it stands on the day of taping, May 13th, 2024. And before I get a lot of hate mail, let me just make clear I'm not taking a side. I am not arguing for a side. I do have my own opinions, but this is not the episode I'm going to talk about them. Instead, I want to take what I consider to be the best arguments from either side and compare and contrast them with the objective of drawing an inference about the possibilities for a lasting peace between Israel and Gaza. So I'll give you the conclusion first, and then you can see how I got there. The shocking conclusion is that based on a debate analysis of the two best arguments, the best that I've been able to find, the conclusion is there is no lasting peace, and there can be no lasting peace between Israel and Gaza. That all you can really get is ceasefires with intermittent periods of violence. Why is that? It's because in order to have a debate, you need to agree on the definitions, and you need to agree on the facts, namely that the facts are the facts. You can use different facts, but you've got to have the goodwill to assume that the facts that the other side brings to the table are indeed truthful. In this particular situation, we have definitions like genocide and occupation that are different on the Israeli side and the Gaza side. We have data points that aren't accepted. There are Hamas supporters who claim that what happened on October 7th of last year is fake news, that what we see in videos are doctored video. The moment you have a disagreement on data points and definitions, you can't have a debate. And if you can't have a debate, you can't have a discussion. And if you can't have a discussion, you can't have negotiations. Now let's see how we came to these conclusions. I've gone out and talked to Zionists and to pro-Hamas supporters. One thing I will tell you is that a lot of the students I talked to at Columbia University, for example, that were on the pro-Gaza side were also pro-Hamas supporters. But when you push them on elucidating their data points, assumptions, and conclusions, they got very defensive. And so I found it very hard to just understand the perspective. So I finally understood the perspective after talking to a few cultured, educated Palestinians who knew a lot about the issue and were willing to talk about it in a calm manner rather than articulate a lot of unsubstantiated assertions. So the best I could do is come up with an analogy that I think makes a lot of sense. And that analogy is the Nat Turner Rebellion in Virginia in 1831 on August 21st. Nat Turner was a slave who could read and became a preacher, and he thought the eclipse on the 21st of August 1831 was a sign that God had asked him to lead a rebellion. So he and a group of other slaves started a rebellion. That rebellion spread, and between 50 and 57 whites were killed, women, children, men. Eventually, the slaves were caught and they were hung. That included Nat Turner. The abolitionists, though, had an interesting perspective. Essentially, their argument had to do with proximate cause. Their argument was that you can't just look at the day of the rebellion, you have to look at the proximate cause, which was not the rebellion itself, but the years of torture that preceded the breakout. The key to understanding the pro-Hamas perspective is that they have that same perspective. Now, again, no analogy is perfectly accurate. You can nitpick and find differences. But the important thing in understanding the perspective is they regard Hamas on October 7th as essentially freedom fighters who escaped jail. And the pro-Hamas supporters cheer them on. Here's a quote from the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a group that's very prominent at Columbia University. After October 7th, they sent out an email to their members, and that email contained the words, "These are liberation fighters paragliding into occupied territory." So what does that tell us? It tells us that they regard the Hamas fighters as freedom fighters. And what's another way to think of that? The other way to think of that is they're saying that you got to look at context. You can't just look at the day. That in fact, what happened on October 7th was an eye for an eye for previous pain that was caused. And an eye for an eye is a principle that's in the Bible. Now look, I'm not justifying that. I'm not pro-Hamas. I'm just, I'm trying to understand the arguments. That's it. So don't kill the messenger. So what does the argument look like? It looks like there's perceived, let's take away the word perceived. There's a lot of dead Palestinians, even before October 7. That's the data point. The assumption is if there's a lot of dead Palestinians caused by IDF, then that justifies an eye for an eye. Therefore, October 7th was an eye for an eye, and therefore it was just. That is the argument in the pro-Hamas side. Now let's look at the Israeli side. The Israeli side is easier to understand. Basically, it's a self-defense argument. So the argument goes something like this. Again, these are the best arguments on both sides that I've been able to discover. Don't kill the messenger. Their argument is choices of consequences. The elected government of a territory attacked the state of Israel on October 7th, and therefore a war started. All wars have collateral damage. It is not okay that children die, that women die. But unfortunately, if we live in a real world, all wars have collateral damage. And they would use they have used the examples of other wars, which always have collateral damage. When the Allies went into Berlin, there was collateral damage and civilians died. When the U.S. dropped nuclear bombs on Japan, on Nagasaki, there was collateral damage. So all wars have collateral damage. That's the Israeli side. And their argument is they don't like war any more than anybody else. But if you don't like war, you shouldn't start wars. And so the question they asked to the Gaza supporters, and I'm not claiming that all pro-Palestinian people are Gaza supporters, but I did find a tremendous inability to denounce Hamas amongst the supporters. So there is support, but not all pro-Palestinian people are Gaza or Hamas supporters. They said, the Israelis asked, why aren't there signs on the pro-Palestinian side saying, Hamas, why did you start this war that killed Palestinians, innocent Palestinians? That's the Jewish angle. So their argument is data point number one, October 7th. And from their point of view, it's an unprovoked attack. assumption, if somebody attacks you, you attack back in a moment of self-defense. And wars have consequences. Conclusion. Because wars have consequences, there is collateral damage, and we have an objective, and in order to achieve that objective, unfortunately, there will be collateral damage. But we will pursue until the objective is met. So those are the two arguments. Now, one thing I will say is I'll bring in two intellectuals. One is Henry Kissinger. In 1957, he wrote a book about, and this is my concluding statement, he wrote a book about the Congress of Vienna in 1815. And he basically said that, look, you had these two protagonists. You had Castlereagh on the British side, you had Metternich on the Austrian side, and they sat together and they created, in the post-Napoleonic period, a set of rules that lasted till the First World War, from 1815 right to the First World War. You had 100 years of peace. And the reason, Henry Kissinger pointed out, is that they agreed on the rules of the game. And his point was, when people don't agree on the rules of the game, you have disequilibrium. And all you can hope for is ceasefires with intermittent periods of violence. And that disequilibrium is where we are today. Now let me bring in another intellectual, one of my favorites, Thomas Sowell. He got a PhD from Chicago, very much part of the Chicago School, but he also taught at Cornell University. And I have a soft spot for him because I also did my MBA at Cornell University. So Thomas Sowell had this quote, which I love, which is, "There are no solutions," he said, "there are only trade-offs." So Kissinger's point was that disequilibrium represents an imperfect but real situation, and that sometimes the solution, which is peace, is not attainable. All you can do is imperfect trade-offs. So with that analysis, I hope you gain some insight into the power of debate analysis, how it can create inferences about what's going to happen in the future. What will happen, who knows? It might or might not be true, but we'll all find out. See you in the next video.